Hello everybody, welcome to my channel.
Charlton Heston, 1923 to 2008, was an American actor and one of Hollywood's most commanding screen presences, known for his powerful voice, heroic roles, and a career that spanned more than 6 decades. Born John Charles Carter on October 4, 1923, in Illinois, Heston grew up in a family that appreciated literature and the arts. His interest in acting began early and grew during his college years at Northwestern University, where he studied drama and honed the imposing stage persona that would later define his film work. Heston served as a radio operator and aerial gunner in the U.S. Army Air Forces during World War II. After the war, he moved to New York and worked in theater and live television, eventually catching the attention of Hollywood. His breakout film role came when director Cecil B. DeMille cast him as Moses in The Ten Commandments, 1956. The role elevated Heston to international stardom and established him as an actor who excelled in epic, larger-than-life portrayals. Heston became a defining figure of the classic, historical epic genre. He starred in a string of major films, including Ben-Hur, 1959, his most famous performance, which earned him the Academy Award for Best Actor. El Cid, 1961, a sweeping epic that showcased his skill in playing noble, mythic figures. Planet of the Apes, 1968, a landmark in science fiction cinema, remembered for his intense, memorable lines. Soylent Green, 1973, another influential sci-fi film, reflecting Heston's growing attraction to thought-provoking, dystopian themes. In addition to acting, Heston became a prominent figure in arts advocacy and politics. He served as president of the Screen Actors Guild, supported civil rights in the 1960s, famously marching with Martin Luther King Jr., and later became president of the National Rifle Association, NRA, in the late 1990s, which brought him into the center of national political debate. Heston remained active in film and public life until his later years. He announced in 2002 that he had symptoms consistent with Alzheimer's disease and gradually retired from public appearances. He passed away on April 5, 2008, at the age of 84. Charlton Heston is remembered as a larger-than-life figure, a towering presence in classic cinema, a symbol of old Hollywood heroism, and a man deeply engaged with the cultural and political currents of his time. Charlton Heston's life and career extended well beyond his status as a Hollywood icon. Beneath the monumental roles and commanding on-screen persona was a complex man driven by a strong sense of duty, whether toward his craft, his industry, or his principles. Early career and rise to stardom. After working in theater and early television, Heston gained recognition for his roles in live TV dramas in the early 1950s, a medium that tested actors in real time. His performance style, serious, earnest, and intense, caught the attention of directors who saw in him the ideal leading man for historical and biblical stories. His physique and voice naturally conveyed authority, making him a frequent choice for powerful or heroic figures. Difficult physical shoots became common in his early Hollywood career. Films like The Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur required immense stamina, demanding enormous sets, hundreds of extras, and complicated stunts. Heston famously did many of his own stunts in Ben-Hur, including parts of the legendary chariot race sequence. Versatility beyond epics. Although best known for epic dramas, Heston consistently pushed for roles that challenged expectations. He worked in various genres: film noir in Touch of Evil, 1958, directed by Orson Welles; adventure and westerns like Will Penny, 1967, a film Heston considered one of his best performances for its subtlety. science fiction in Planet of the Apes, The Omega Man, 1971, and Soylent Green, all of which became cult classics. Heston was admired for bringing gravitas to every role, no matter the genre. Political and social activism. One of the most defining aspects of Heston's off-screen life was his activism. In the 1960s, he was a vocal supporter of the civil rights movement. He marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr., participating in protests and speaking out in favor of equal rights when doing so could have harmed his Hollywood standing. Later in life, his political views shifted toward conservatism. In 1998, he was elected president of the National Rifle Association, NRA. His famous declaration, "From my cold, dead hands," became emblematic of his outspoken defense of gun ownership rights. This political chapter made him a polarizing figure, though he remained respected for his willingness to stand firmly by his beliefs. Personal life. Charlton Heston married Lydia Clark in 1944. And they remained together until his death, over 60 years, one of Hollywood's longest marriages. They had 2 children, Fraser and Holly. Heston was known for his discipline, reliability, and commitment to family despite the demands of his career. He was passionate about literature, a lifelong Shakespeare admirer, hunting and the outdoors, photography, particularly during travel and film shoots. Legacy. Charlton Heston's legacy rests on 3 pillars: cinema. His performances helped define the golden age of Hollywood epics. Ben-Hur remains one of the most celebrated films ever made. Personal integrity. Whether one agreed with him politically or not, Heston was unapologetically himself and stood publicly for what he believed. Cultural influence. His films continue to be studied, quoted, and revisited for their emotional power and their role in shaping modern blockbuster storytelling. Heston was a man who always reached for the mythic and monumental, on screen and in life. Approach to acting and craft. Charlton Heston approached acting with the discipline of an athlete and the reverence of a scholar. He once said that acting in an epic demanded the size of Shakespeare and the stamina of a marathon runner. Preparation. Heston meticulously annotated scripts, breaking down character motivations scene by scene. Voice and presence. His training at Northwestern refined his resonant voice, which became one of his strongest tools: heroic, authoritative, instantly recognizable. Physical commitment. He performed many of his own stunts, especially in Ben-Hur, where the chariot race sequence remains one of cinema's most legendary achievements. Even after decades, stunt coordinators praise Heston's athleticism and courage. Unlike method actors, Heston believed, the character is not inside you. You go out and meet him. This traditional approach emphasized discipline, dignity, and projection of character, rather than inward emotional immersion. Important film roles. Highlights. Film year. Role impact. The Ten Commandments. 1956. Moses cemented Heston as the face of biblical and epic cinema. Ben-Hur. 1959. Judah Ben-Hur won him the Academy Award for Best Actor, a triumph of physical and emotional stamina. El Cid. 1961. Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar showed his ability to balance heroism with emotional complexity. 55 Days at Peking. 1963. Major Matt Lewis showed a more rugged, textured performance style. Planet of the Apes. 1968. George Taylor famous for the shocking final scene and iconic line, "You maniacs. You blew it up." The Omega Man. 1971. Robert Neville became a blueprint for future dystopian and post-apocalyptic films. Soylent Green. 1973. Thorne introduced one of cinema's most famous twist endings. Heston also became a mentor to younger actors and directors. His son, Fraser Clark Heston, directed him in several later projects. Leadership in Hollywood. Charlton Heston believed actors had a responsibility to protect the dignity of the profession. He served 2 terms as president of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, during a time when the industry was shifting from the old studio system to modern contracts. His leadership achievements included advocating for actors' intellectual property rights, negotiating for better residual payments from television reruns, helping actors transition into new media formats. Heston once remarked, "Actors should be paid fairly for the rest of their lives for work that endures." Civil rights and activism. Though known later for conservative positions, in the early 1960s Heston was outspoken in support of civil rights when many public figures stayed silent. He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the 1963 Civil Rights March in Washington. He spoke out against racial segregation in Hollywood. He publicly refused to work at venues that enforced discriminatory policies. He later said, "I felt compelled to be on the right side of history." Only later did his politics shift toward defending individual freedoms, personal responsibility, and gun rights, a transition that made him one of the most polarizing figures in American culture. Later life and final years. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Heston continued acting, narrating documentaries, doing guest roles on television, and appearing in films, including a cameo in Tim Burton's 2001 Planet of the Apes remake. In 2002, he publicly announced symptoms consistent with Alzheimer's disease, a moment met with widespread respect and sympathy. He spent his final years quietly at home with his wife Lydia, whom he married in 1944, a marriage that lasted over 6 decades. Charlton Heston died on April 5, 2008, at age 84. Legacy. Charlton Heston's impact remains immense. He defined the Hollywood epic hero. He inspired generations of actors to approach their craft with seriousness and discipline. He shaped industry policies and actor rights. He remains a symbol of conviction, whether one agreed with him or not. In Hollywood history, few figures were as large as the characters they played. Charlton Heston was one of them. Later career and reflections on acting. As Charlton Heston entered the 1970s and 1980s, his career transitioned from leading roles in grand epics to character-driven performances and leadership positions within the film industry. He embraced this change gracefully, often remarking that an actor's greatest challenge is to remain relevant without repeating oneself. After his streak of iconic films in the 1960s, Heston's 1970s work reflected his willingness to explore darker and more philosophical material. In The Omega Man, 1971, he portrayed one of the last survivors of a global plague, an allegorical story about isolation and humanity's future. In Soylent Green, 1973, he starred in a dystopian thriller with one of cinema's most shocking endings, showing his openness to unconventional and thought-provoking roles. By the 1980s, Heston also turned to television, where he appeared in miniseries such as Chiefs, 1983, and A Man for All Seasons, 1988. He also provided his deep, resonant voice to narration and documentaries, including historical programs and religious specials. He often described acting as a moral art form, saying that playing larger-than-life characters wasn't about ego but about showing what human beings can be at their best, or worst. To him, portraying Moses, Ben-Hur, or El Cid was not just performance but a way to embody timeless moral conflicts. Leadership in Hollywood. Heston's influence extended behind the scenes as well. He served multiple terms as president of the Screen Actors Guild, 1965 to 1971, advocating for fair contracts, better working conditions, and recognition for performers during a period of major industry change. Colleagues often described him as articulate, fair-minded, and unwavering in his convictions. Later, he joined the American Film Institute's Board of Trustees and supported film preservation efforts. Heston believed that classic cinema was not just entertainment but a record of human imagination and cultural evolution. He often said that losing films was like burning chapters of our civilization's diary. Political and cultural influence. Heston's public image evolved considerably over time. In the 1960s, he was seen as a liberal activist. He supported the Civil Rights Act and was one of the few white Hollywood stars to speak at the 1963 March on Washington, standing with Martin Luther King Jr. He also opposed racial segregation within his own film industry. However, by the 1980s and 1990s, Heston had become a staunch conservative, aligning himself with the Republican Party and advocating for limited government and individual freedoms. His tenure as NRA president, 1998 to 2003, was both celebrated and criticized. His impassioned speeches, especially his famous declaration, "From my cold, dead hands," became cultural flashpoints, symbolizing the growing debate around gun rights in America. Heston acknowledged this shift, once stating, "I didn't change. The world around me did." Awards and honors. Charlton Heston's contributions to cinema earned him numerous accolades. Academy Award for Best Actor for Ben-Hur, 1959, Cecil B. DeMille Award, Golden Globes, 1967, for Lifetime Achievement. Jean Hersholt Humanitarian Award, 1978, from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Kennedy Center Honor, 1997, for his cultural contributions. Presidential Medal of Freedom, 2003, the highest civilian award in the United States. In addition to these, Heston received honorary degrees and tributes from film organizations worldwide, recognizing not only his performances but his leadership and advocacy. Final years and passing. In 2002, Heston publicly announced that he was showing early symptoms consistent with Alzheimer's disease. His candor about his condition drew admiration, as he faced the illness with the same dignity and strength that characterized his entire life. He gradually retired from public appearances but remained a respected figure until his passing on April 5, 2008, at the age of 84. His funeral was attended by friends, colleagues, and admirers from across the political and cultural spectrum, a testament to his broad impact and the respect he commanded. Legacy. Charlton Heston left behind a legacy that few actors have matched. He was a symbol of the classic Hollywood hero, noble, resolute, and unflinching. His performances in films like Ben-Hur, The Ten Commandments, and Planet of the Apes remain benchmarks of cinematic grandeur. Off-screen, his leadership in the arts, activism, and politics reflected his lifelong belief that every person has a duty to stand for something. Whether celebrated or criticized, Heston's influence was always deeply felt. In his autobiography, In the Arena, 1995, he wrote, "I've played the hero often enough to know what it takes. In the end, courage is not about glory, it's about doing what must be done, even when the crowd jeers instead of cheers." Behind the scenes, stories from his most iconic films. The Ten Commandments, 1956, Cecil B. DeMille cast Heston because of his strong features and deep-set eyes, joking that he resembled Michelangelo's statue of Moses. During filming in the Egyptian desert, Heston insisted on doing physically demanding scenes himself. The robe weighed more than 20 pounds, and temperatures reached over 45 degrees Celsius, 113 degrees Fahrenheit. Heston said playing Moses changed him spiritually, admitting, "You cannot spend a year of your life being a man of faith without some of it touching you." Ben-Hur, 1959, The chariot race is one of cinema's most legendary sequences. The track took over 3 months to construct and was the largest set ever built at the time. Heston trained daily with real horses, becoming skilled enough to handle the reins during many shots. Stuntmen performed the most dangerous parts, but Heston's athleticism allowed for long continuous takes, making the race feel more realistic and intense. Heston later reflected, "It was the hardest physical thing I have ever done. But it was also the most exhilarating." Planet of the Apes, 1968, Heston advocated for keeping the ending a surprise, ensuring audiences experienced the shock of the final reveal without spoilers. The film's ending, now iconic, was largely shaped by Heston's performance and emotional intensity. Charlton Heston as a cultural symbol during the peak of his career, Heston became a mythic archetype. He represented courage, stoicism, and moral certainty. In an era of ambiguity and anti-heroes, Heston embodied the hero as leader, noble, authoritative, almost biblical. Film critics often describe him as the last of the old Hollywood titans. His roles resonated because of his presence. He filled the screen with conviction, as if the stakes were always monumental. Work ethic and personal discipline. Heston believed in tireless preparation. He woke early and followed a strict daily schedule. He memorized not only his own lines but often the entire script. He respected the work regardless of genre, from Shakespeare to science fiction to television commercials. His philosophy: "Work is the rent we pay for living on this earth." He never cared whether the film was a blockbuster or small production. What mattered was giving his best. Relationships in Hollywood. Despite his intimidating presence, many colleagues described Heston as warm, loyal, and surprisingly humorous. He developed a lifelong friendship with Cecil B. DeMille, who became a mentor figure. He admired and worked with Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, calling him the most brilliant mind I ever met. He supported younger actors and often helped them negotiate fair pay or better contracts. Heston wasn't a Hollywood socialite. He preferred family, nature, and solitude over parties and attention. The shift in politics, why it happened. Heston didn't start as a conservative. In the 1950s to 60s he was pro-civil rights, anti-racial segregation, supportive of liberal social causes. By the late 1970s and 1980s, he became disillusioned with Hollywood politics. Feeling that some debates lacked tolerance for dissent, he shifted toward a philosophy of individual liberty, becoming known as a defender of constitutional rights. He explained the shift honestly: "I didn't change. The world around me changed." Regardless of political debate, even his critics acknowledged his courage to speak publicly about his beliefs, knowing it could cost him roles. Final years. When Heston announced that he was showing symptoms of Alzheimer's disease in 2002, he delivered a humble, emotional statement asking for understanding and privacy. He faced illness with the same dignity he had lived with. He died on April 5, 2008, surrounded by his family. His wife Lydia, whom he married in 1944, survived him. They were married for 64 years. One of the longest and strongest marriages in Hollywood. Why Charlton Heston endures as an actor. He shaped the cinematic epic. Few actors today carry his kind of monumental gravity. As a man, he lived by conviction, discipline, and purpose. As a legacy, his films defined eras and continue to be cultural touchstones. Heroes aren't born. They're built, through choice, effort, and sacrifice. Charlton Heston lived like one. Chronological filmography highlights. With commentary, 1950s. The epic hero emerges. Year film role notes. 1950 Dark City. Danny Haley. His film debut showed his natural intensity. 1952 The Greatest Show on Earth. Brad Braden. Big break. Cecil B. DeMille spots his potential. 1956 The Ten Commandments. Moses elevated him to international stardom. 1958 Touch of Evil. Ramon Vargas. Directed by Orson Welles. Cult masterpiece. 1959 Ben-Hur. Judah Ben-Hur wins Academy Award for Best Actor. Landmark epic. 1960s Range and Authority. Year film role notes. 1961 El Cid. Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar. One of his most nuanced performances. 1963 55 Days at Peking. Major Matt Lewis. Large-scale historical drama. 1965 The Agony and the Ecstasy. Michelangelo Heston insisted on studying art history and visiting Sistine Chapel before filming. 1968 Planet of the Apes. George Taylor. Iconic role. Unforgettable twist ending. 1970s The philosophical sci-fi era. Year film role notes. 1971 The Omega Man. Robert Neville. One of the earliest Last Man on Earth films. 1973 Soylent Green. Robert Thorne influenced later dystopian storytelling. 1976 Midway. Captain Matt Garth added gravitas to ensemble war film. 1980s to 2000s Mentor and Elder Statesman. Year film work role contribution notes. 1981 The King and I. Broadway revival. King Mongkut critically praised stage return. 1993 The Bible Collection. Various narrated religious documentaries. 2001 Planet of the Apes. Tim Burton remake. Zaius cameo, a nod to his legacy. Heston acted in nearly 100 films, plus numerous documentaries, stage roles, and TV projects. Checkmark awards and honors. Academy Award, Best Actor, Ben-Hur, 1959, Cecil B. DeMille Lifetime Achievement Award, 1967, Presidential Medal of Freedom, 2003, the highest civilian honor in the United States. Kennedy Center Honors, 1997, Screen Actors Guild Lifetime Achievement Award, 1971. His achievements earned him a permanent place in film history. Checkmark Rare and fascinating facts. He recorded daily journals for decades. These meticulous writings filled numerous notebooks and provided insights into Hollywood history. Heston could read and quote Shakespeare from memory well into his 70s. He was ambidextrous and practiced archery, fencing, and horseback riding to maintain physical readiness for film roles. He once said, "Hollywood has a short memory. A journal doesn't." Checkmark how fellow actors and directors described him. Martin Scorsese. Heston understood scale, not just as an actor, but as a human being. Orson Welles. After Touch of Evil, he brought dignity to a film that desperately needed it. Steven Spielberg. After Heston's passing, he was one of the last true cinematic giants. Even critics who disagreed with his politics often expressed admiration for his commitment, discipline, and seriousness. Checkmark influence on modern cinema. Charlton Heston paved the way for actors who portray larger-than-life figures, such as Russell Crowe in Gladiator, Mel Gibson in Braveheart, Liam Neeson in Schindler's List, and Rob Roy. The trope of the reluctant hero who carries moral burden can be traced directly to Heston's work in films like Ben-Hur and El Cid. Film historians note, he didn't just act in epics, he legitimized them. Checkmark final thoughts. A man of immense scale. Charlton Heston was a paradox. Heroic yet introspective, commanding yet humble, private yet publicly engaged. He lived his life on the principle, duty first, always. He brought authentic moral conviction to every character he played. Many actors become famous. Very few become legendary. Charlton Heston remains one of the latter. Personal life. The private Charlton Heston. Despite playing grand, larger-than-life characters, Heston's personal life was remarkably grounded. Checkmark. A long, unusual, devoted marriage. Charlton Heston married Lydia Clark in 1944. They met while studying theater, when both were unknown students. They stayed married for 64 years, a rare success story in Hollywood. They raised 2 children, Fraser, who became a director, and Holly. They protected their private life fiercely and avoided Hollywood scandals. Heston often said success in marriage required the same qualities as success in acting: commitment, discipline, and forgiveness. Lydia traveled with him during film shoots, even on remote locations like Spain, Egypt, and Italy. She was his closest advisor. He would show her scripts before accepting roles. Later, when he grew ill, Lydia became his caregiver and constant companion. Glowing star personality and values. Charlton Heston stood out because of his discipline. He approached his career like a military mission. Woke early every morning, exercised daily, rehearsed lines, intensely avoided drinking and partying. He believed acting was a craft, not celebrity. He once said, "My job is not to be famous, it's to be good." Heston kept meticulous daily journals his entire adult life, documenting acting techniques, conversations with directors, leadership lessons, personal self-evaluations. These journals became valuable historical documents after his death. Glowing star. His philosophy of leadership. Charlton Heston naturally became a leader, not only on screen but off it. President of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG. As SAG president in the 1960s, he pushed for fair compensation for actors, better residual payments from TV reruns, and new media protection of actors' intellectual property. He believed actors deserved to be respected as workers, not disposable commodities. His motto: actors are not ornaments on a studio shelf. Glowing star. Civil rights activism, 1960s. Many people don't realize how outspoken Heston was in the early civil rights era, before it became safe to do so. He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963, picked up a sign that read, "All men are created equal," refused to work for venues that segregated audiences, served on a Hollywood committee promoting racial equality. He said, "I am proud to use my fame when it helps someone else's freedom." Heston's early speeches on civil rights are historically significant and show a progressive, justice-driven worldview. Glowing star. Shift to conservative politics, 1980s–2000s. In later life, Heston became associated with conservative causes, especially gun rights. He believed in individual liberty, constitutional freedoms, personal responsibility. When elected president of the National Rifle Association, NRA, in 1998, he gave one of the most famous speeches of his life. From my cold, dead hands. Whether admired or criticized, Heston never cared about popularity. He cared about conviction.